Today we're going to tackle a different kind of problem on Tractor Time with Tim. Right here I've got the ramps for my trailer. And these ramps have worked well for my tractor, but when I got Casey, they're just not quite strong enough. Right in here, this aspect is not quite strong enough. The way these work is that this part of this channel sits right down in a channel on the trailer to keep them from falling off. Now that channel on the trailer is really only about a ½ inch tall, so we don't need the entire inch here. But what's happening is that this part here is too weak, okay? And when I get Casey driven up on here, it actually bends that beam right there, and you can see here, actually on both of them, where this is bent repeatedly. Now what I've been doing is just taking a sledgehammer and beating that back to, reasonably level. But I've been kind of putting off the inevitable, which is to come up with a way to fix it. Now I'm wondering if I put it off a little bit too long, because when I see over here, I actually see a fracture here. So perhaps we can work on that crack a little bit, but we actually have a longer term solution in mind here. Those of you who have watched this channel for a long time can probably remember me doing some steel cutting with the compound miter saw. I just replaced the regular wood cutting blade with a steel cutting blade, used it like a chop saw. Today, that changes. I didn't buy a high-end one, but I've got a low-end Harbor Freight version of a steel cutoff saw. This is the 3.5 horsepower version. They have a 2 horsepower version. The reviews on that one said it was underpowered. It looks identical to this saw, other than it's a different color. Okay, you'll notice it does not come with a blade. So we used a second 20% off coupon and got a 5-pack of blades. This is just the kind of tool that I can't justify buying a better quality. I really doubt that I'm going to be a full-time steel worker. I needed something a little more applicable than my compound miter saw, but I don't think I really needed the highest quality version. There's a little lever here on the back side that keeps the arbor from turning while I'm taking the bolt out of it. When shopping for these saws, I found that this one runs at 3,500 RPMs. The cheapest one at Menards runs at 3,800, and the slightly better one at Menards runs at 4,000 RPMs. For this project, we need a piece 15 inches long, and so I've measured off 15 inches, used my little soap stick to make a mark and a square, and now it's time to pinch it here in our jaw. Now, I thought it was worth pointing this out. First of all, this thing seems rather chintzy, but it does have a couple of features that are really nice. If I loosen this up a little bit, I don't have to screw that end to end. I can just flip this over and it'll slide in and out very nicely. Fairly nicely anyway. It's a lot better than screwing it in and out. So I can just push it up there, and if you can see the threads right on there, turn that over, and then I can screw it in, and it'll hold very nice. So while it looks chintzy, it seems entirely functional. Now I believe this thing's going to be fairly protective of the sparks. I believe it's going to hold them in the back side here pretty well, hold them in back here pretty well, but I'm still going to wear safety glasses because getting one of these steel sparks in your eyes would be no fun at all. Okay, I've made my mark, squared it all the way across. I've tested my saw that it cuts where I want to saw. I've verified that everything is out of the way of the sparks, because I don't want to be burning up any extension cord or anything else. And I'm ready to saw. Probably about halfway done. I'm going to get around here out of the sparks a little more myself. Okay, we finished with the cutting. Now I want to show you what I've got in mind as to how to put together. The intent is to make a triangle here to strengthen this. We'll still have plenty of room here to hook. We'll run a bead right down through here, and we'll stand it up on end and run a bead right back through there, such that there's no way for this to stretch any further again. As we get to this next step, you need to know I'm not a welder. But in the spirit of Tractor Time with Tim, we'll give it a shot. Try not to be scared of anything, right? Now, if you're thinking about doing some welding on your own and you're inexperienced like me, I think it's worthwhile to think through the type of project that you're working on. Figure out the risk, right? And I'm not talking about the risk of burning yourself with the welder or the, that kind of risk. I'm talking about the risk of what you're welding on and what it's going to be holding. For instance, I think it would not be wise to have me welding on a bridge or a tall building or something like that. Something that's structural that really might have a serious safety issue. But if you think specifically about this project here, it's not used in the actual transport of the equipment. The worst that's going to happen is that something's going to bend here, okay? It's very unlikely to break immediately. I take these ramps in and out every time I use the tractor or Casey. I can quickly recognize if they're bent. I can quickly recognize if the weld has cracked or otherwise there's some sort of a structural issue. I really don't think there's much risk in what I'm doing here. Worst case, I have to take it to somebody else and he cuts this whole thing off here and builds a new channel in here that's a little stronger to fix this. So I really think it's pretty low risk here. It doesn't have to look the greatest, and it won't. When you see my equipment, when you see the type of rods I'm using, any experience you have there, you'll see that it's not going to look the best. But hey, I'm using the experience my dad taught me and using his suggestions on the equipment. In fact, the welder that I'm going to be using was purchased in 1976 when he bought his new shed. He had to have a welder, and so he bought this Lincoln Buzz Box, as they call them. He used it until last year, and last year they thought it quit. They bought their new welder, and they got an AC/DC welder, a little nicer welder. After they bought this new welder, they realized that the only thing wrong with this one was the cord. So they replaced the cord, and it still works as good as new. Now, it is an AC Buzz Box. It's not going to be as fancy as what you see on all these other channels that are showing you how to weld. It's not as easy to use as a MIG welder. It's not as flexible perhaps as a TIG or a DC stick welder. You know what? I've seen this equipment perform some amazing repairs on huge equipment and on equipment that takes a lot of stress and hold together. It's less about the equipment than it is how you structure things, how you put the steel together, and then just to make sure you have a good solid bead of weld. So in this case, again, we're just going to take this piece of 1/4 inch by 3. We're going to set it right in here. I'm going to weld a bead right there. I'll turn it over or stand it up or something. I'm not exactly sure how I'll get that done, and try to put a bead right back there. I can only remember one time in my life that I've actually tried to weld before yesterday, and that was when I was probably 12 or 13 years old. Quite frankly, I wasn't old enough to have the attention span to do the welding at that time. But I can tell you that I've watched a lot of welding. Dad always had 2 helmets, so he would let us put a helmet on and watch him weld. But he loved to do the welding himself, so there wasn't a lot of time for us to get to do it. I've got the ground clamp. I'm just clamping it directly to the ramp, just down there a ways to be out of the way. And I think what I'll do is just try to put a tack, maybe on the corners here, just to get it started. And then after we get that done, we'll see if we can run a bead across the whole thing. Now, when I was younger, we didn't have the auto darkening helmet, and that made it really hard for me. I found it really difficult to strike an arc and find out where I needed to be welding. One of the challenges I have is seeing where I'm going, right? I don't feel like I see quite enough. It's just one little glow spot I don't see quite enough. Maybe I need a fancier helmet that allows me to adjust that brightness on the helmet, but I don't have that at this point. We're using a 6011 rod. That's pretty well the standard for an AC welder. Okay, it gets really smoky when you're welding, so typically you would weld outside. Unfortunately, it's about 3 degrees today. I'll eventually open the door here, but I'll have to get a little bit more smoky before I do that. Now, what everybody says is one of the negative aspects of the 6011 rod is getting the slag off. And I found that to be the case. It just doesn't come off easily. Sometimes when I see people using other rods, they just chip it a little bit and all the slag just comes off. Well, that just doesn't happen. Another aspect is the splatter. I don't know if you can see it from there, and quite frankly, I don't know if I want the camera to be any closer. But there is some splatter there. But overall, I'm pleased so far. For someone with as little experience as me, I believe I'm going to be able to get it to hold. Man, that looks good. Good is relative, I'm sure. It looks good to me, but in the welding field, I've got pretty low standards. I don't think I did as well that time. I think I may have left a hole. It's hard to keep concentrating. Yeah, I left a couple of holes there. It's hard to keep moving at a consistent speed. There's several different things to think about. You know, where you're going, how close your rod is to the steel, and how fast you're going, whether you're getting ahead of your puddle or not. I'm sure it comes natural with just a little bit of practice. I think my welds look a little better when I go slowly, pushing maybe a little more weld in a given location than what I would typically think needs to be there. Seems like I leave holes when I go too fast. So there's a spot right here in the middle I'm not very pleased with, but I am pleased from here to here and from here to here. Okay, I'll let you see it. But I'd appreciate it if you'd recognize that I did one pad of bead yesterday as a practice, and that's all the welding I've done since I was 12 or 13. And even then, it was only one little practice. Again, I think it looks pretty good over there. It's really hot yet. I've got a spot here where there's holes, and then not too bad here. Okay, it got so smoky I could hardly see, so I had to open the door. We'll leave it open for a little while, but I can tell you it's chilly coming in from there. A couple things I want to point out here. I've positioned the ramp so that I can weld right here, and I think that's going to be fine. Yeah, still a little warm, but I'm going to weld right here. I've got a clamp here to keep it from sliding down. That's the only big clamp for steel that I have. Up here I've got a wood clamp. Now, obviously I can't get that near the weld, but it's still ice cold up there, so I think we've got plenty of distance there. But I believe I can reach right in there and get across there. Maybe not right at the ends under these braces here, but I can get under there, and I believe I can weld that without any problem. Okay, so that wasn't good. I burned it entirely too much there. I'm going to see if I can turn the amperage down a little bit. The problem is there's a gap there, and I'm not doing a very good job of handling that gap. There, that's a little better. I'm learning. And remember, it doesn't really matter as long as it holds. Pretty good. Okay, so I burned a bad hole in it right up here. Other than that, it's entirely bearable. I think I'll see if I can put something in that hole. I think I remember Dad saying something like, paint should cover it. That was definitely more challenging than the front side because of the gap. And I really didn't know what I was doing up here, and I was probably welding too much up on this piece. So after I got to the hole, then I realized if I would weld focusing on this other piece over here, and then just a little bit of my weld getting up here on this piece, then it was working better. Not bad for a beginner. Now I got this welding table at Harbor Freight, Actually, my in-laws bought it for me for Christmas a year or two ago because I've been planning to try to do some welding for a year or two, but there's always too much stuff to do, right? So I pledged during this holiday season that I was actually going to get the time to weld, and I had a near-term project that was demanding that I do so. As you could see, this was already cracked. Now I need to call in a lifeline. Actually, I wish that I could get some feedback. I guess I should be doing this live, huh? But I need to know what to do with that crack. That crack right there, should I just try to put a bead of weld on it, or should I leave it be? I just don't know. Folks, I didn't really see anything that I need to change in the approach. You may see it, but being inexperienced, I don't really see anything wrong with the approach. Obviously, I need improvement on my technique. So the execution of what I'm doing always needs improvement. But I'm going to take the same approach this time. I think I'm going to tack it down on the back side first, and then I'm going to tack on the front corners, and then I'll run the bead all the way across the front again. I noticed that I'm a very inconsistent welder. I eventually decided to put a bead of weld right there on that crack on this side. I didn't on the other ramp yet. I don't know if it's wise to weld it or if I should have just left it alone. I don't think it will really matter because I think that crack will no longer be the biggest stress point. I do believe the triangle piece will take most of the stress here now. So that pretty much does it. My first welding project as an adult. Ironically, using the same welder that I used at 12 or 13 years old. Pretty amazing, I would say. Pretty amazing, first, that the welder's still around, and second, that it still works. Now, I'd appreciate your feedback in the comments section. I don't know how this will go. I'll probably get a bunch of comments saying you're an idiot, worst welder ever, you should just go back to your software job, and all that kind of stuff. And that's probably fair. But I'm hoping some of the rest of you see that, just like anything else on this channel, you can do it. One of those little BuzzBox welders is not so expensive. You can pick them up on Craigslist for under $200 easy. The rest of the equipment is inexpensive as well. And perhaps it can be a fun hobby for you. Perhaps it can be a fun hobby for me. I've got several other projects. I still have that planter over in the corner that I want to work on. And the next project on it is indeed a welding project. I have a couple other small things on my trailer that I want to work on. So there may be more welding in our future. Hopefully I'll get a little better at it. In any case, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Tractor Time with Tim.